India for the world, the India story, the show for the global citizen.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your truth.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Mori Gambhir. Here's a quick look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about the Israel-Hamas war as the Israeli troops raid the Al-Shifa hospital. A number of questions have been raised over the Gaza hospital siege. What happens next? Where do things go from here onwards? On Gravitas tonight, we piece together the latest developments. We tell you more about Israel's strategy and get you the bigger picture. Also on the show for you tonight, we tell you all about the mounting trouble for Rishi Sunak on multiple fronts. And he now has a dangerous enemy, Suella Braverman, who was recently sacked. What should you expect from the crucial Biden-Xi meeting? We set the stage for you with the latest from on the ground. We also make you meet the real-life Dr. Dolittle, who apparently has the skill and the know-how to talk to pet animals. Do magicians have better mental health? We tell you what a study says. All that shortly, but first, we are starting off the show with the latest developments coming in from Israel this minute. The Prime Minister of Israel has issued a new statement. He has warned that there is no safe place left for Hamas in the Gaza Strip, because there is nowhere that the Israeli army will not reach. He made those remarks just a short while after Israeli troops entered the Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, the situation at Israel's border with Lebanon remains tense. On your screen are the latest images. They show smoke billowing from a field in Lebanon after heavy exchange of fire. And back in Jerusalem, the families of hostages taken by Hamas launched a second day of demonstrations. They were seen displaying placards and chanting slogans. urging the Israeli government to do more to secure their release. And in the West Bank, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority has called Israel's war in Gaza a war on hospitals. He says that Israel is targeting the injured and sick people. And last we checked, Israel was yet to comment on these remarks. And speaking of hospitals, let's talk about the Al-Shifa hospital. For the Palestinians, it is the largest medical complex in the Gaza Strip. And for the Israelis, this hospital is a major military base of the Hamas. So in the last 48 hours, this hospital complex has witnessed violence, a fierce gun battle between the IDF and the Hamas. Today came the D-Day. The Israeli forces raided the Al-Shifa hospital. According to reports, dozens of Israeli soldiers entered that facility and stationed tanks in the medical complex. They used loudspeakers ordering young men to give up their arms and surrender themselves. And speaking about the raid, the IDF said that it was conducting a precise and targeted operation against Hamas. It added that several Hamas militants were also killed in the raid. Listen to this.
Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Shifa hospital. The IDF is conducting a ground operation in Gaza to defeat Hamas and rescue our hostages. Israel is at war with Hamas, not with the civilians in Gaza. The IDF forces include medical teams and Arabic speakers who have undergone specified training to prepare for this complex and sensitive environment, with the intent that no harm is caused to the civilians being used by Hamas as human shields.
And have a look at these images now. They show what happened inside the hospital during the raid. Medics were seen trying to evacuate patients from a ward which had apparently been hit by a shell. They could be seen moving patients on stretchers as smoke and dust filled up the corridors.
داخل القسم لوجود غبار ودخان كثيف يسبب اختناق المصابين. يتم إجلاء المرضى بصعوبة بالغة. غبار كثيف في المكان. تابعت الأمر لوجود الغازات التي تنبعث من القذيفة التي أطلقت على مبنى التخصص. إذن الاستهداف مباشر. الأمر صعب ومعقد للغاية.
How many people are at the hospital? According to reports, there are at least 2,300 patients, staff and displaced civilians. They have been trapped inside after days of fierce fighting and aerial bombardment. This figure also, by the way, includes 36 newborn babies who are in urgent need of incubators to survive. There are also patients in the ICU. After the raid, they were forced to move away from life-saving devices. Watch this.
I'm standing here at the ICU at Al-Shifa Medical Complex. This department is suffering after the shutdown of electricity due to lack of fuel. The health ministry warned about the lack of the fuel. This department today at dawn was struck directly by the Israeli occupation forces. Here also the ICU and these children, who were on life machines and artificial respiration, were taken into the corridors of the ICU department. These people here were denied life support devices. They face the loss of their lives because there are no support machines or artificial respiration devices. Around 29 patients are facing this tragedy.
The images are absolutely tragic. The question is, what is Israel doing to save these people? I mean, its target is the Hamas militants, not the civilians. Is it going to let them become collateral damage? No, says the IDF. It has released this video which claims to show how the IDF troops are delivering medical supplies to the hospital to ensure that it does not stop functioning. In its statement, it also said that it was willing to ensure the transfer of incubators to the hospital. But the medics stationed inside say that there are laboratories that are still out of order. They are suffering frequent blackouts, and these blackouts are ruining the blood units stored inside.
Since yesterday in Al-Shifa hospital in the laboratory and blood bank, we have not been able to carry out our duties at the headquarters of the laboratory and blood bank. We moved some blood units to other departments with the presence of CBC machines, at least to offer the service to injured and patients. Tonight the electricity was cut completely. The samples have piled up. Blood units may have ruined completely. We cannot start the machines to do the tests. Under these circumstances, the laboratory and blood bank have stopped, and everything inside may have been ruined and damaged.
And as the siege continues, reactions are beginning to pour in from all over the world. The UN Emergency Relief Chief has said that hospitals should not be turned into battlegrounds. He also urged Israel to ensure the protection of newborns, patients, and medical staff.
Look, Hamas must not, should not use a place like a hospital as a shield for their presence. That is as strong a statement under humanitarian law as is the statement that the hospital should not become a place of a war zone of danger. We find these two issues equally important and equally understandable for both sides.
Meanwhile, back in the United States, the Biden administration is apparently seeking ways to restrain the Israeli military in its operations. This is apparently part of the effort to limit the civilian toll and the risk of a bigger conflict. Reports say that in a letter to President Biden, over 500 political appointees and staff members from about 40 agencies across the Biden administration have criticized America's support for Israel in its war in Gaza. So clearly, the pressure on Israel to scale down its operations is escalating. The question is, will it listen? From where we see it, Israel will not stop until it completely eliminates Hamas. Meanwhile, Syria has made some serious allegations. The country has called for investigation into Israel's alleged use of white phosphorus in Gaza and Lebanon. It wants an OPCW investigation. According to a local news outlet, Syria's envoy to the United Nations, Dr. Al-Hakam Dandi, called for the investigation into Israel during the fourth session of the Conference on Establishment of a Middle East Zone Free of Nuclear Weapons and Other Weapons of Mass Destruction. He called upon the OPCW, or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, to launch an investigation. He said, and I'm quoting, Israel's possession of vast stockpiles of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, with the support of its allies in the United States and other Western countries, has significantly escalated the grave threat to both regional and global peace and security, quote unquote. But this is not the first time that Israel has faced these allegations. Since the Israel-Hamas war started, unverified videos have circulated online. So what exactly are they and why are they a cause of concern? White phosphorus is a highly combustible chemical that burns quickly and brightly when exposed to air. It's also very difficult to put out. It clings onto surfaces, including the skin and clothes, and so it is extremely dangerous. It can cause severe burns, even down to the bone. And so the use of white phosphorus is restricted under international humanitarian law. Although there can be lawful uses, it must never be fired at or in close proximity to a populated civilian area or civilian infrastructure due to the high likelihood that the fires and the smoke it causes spread. It must be noted here that Israel has on multiple occasions denied using the weapon. But with Syria raising this allegation and demanding an investigation, it has become a serious matter. And let's now shift our focus to Pakistan. Last night, we told you how killers are getting killed mysteriously in Pakistan, how terrorists are being shot dead. A total of 19 of them have died this year. 24 hours back, 2 more were hunted down. Just have a look at this video. It's from Pakistan's Punjab province. It shows two Lashkar terrorists being shot at in broad daylight. The incident unfolded at the Kokran Chowk in Sialkot, causing major unrest among the local population. Have a look. You saw that for yourself. Who were these men? They have been identified as Mohammad Muzammil and his associate Naimur Rahman. A third associate was also shot at, and last we checked, he was in a critical condition. Remember, this killing comes just 24 hours after a Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist was killed in Pakistan. His name was Maulana Rahim Ullah Tariq. Tariq was not only a key member of the terror group, he was also a close aide of Masood Azhar. On the 13th of November, the Jaish terrorist was shot dead in Karachi's Orangi town. According to Pakistani media reports, Tariq was on his way to attend a religious gathering when unidentified men opened fire on him. And 3 days before that, on the 10th of November, another LET recruiter and commander, Akram Khan Ghazi, was gunned down by bike-borne assailants in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistani law enforcement tried to point fingers at India, but Pakistani news outlets said infighting within the factions led to his murder. And then on the 7th of November, a key member of another terror group, LET or Lashkar-e-Toiba, Khwaja Shahid, was abducted and later found beheaded. Who exactly was he? Well, Khwaja Shahid was believed to be involved in the 2018 terrorist attack on the Indian Army camp in Jammu and Kashmir's Sunjuwan. That's 4 killings in just 1 month, and it does not even end there. On the 10th of October, Shahid Latif, a Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist and mastermind of the 2016 Pathankot attack, was killed. He was killed by 3 masked gunmen. On the 30th of September, Mufti Qaisar Farooq, a close aide of LET chief Hafiz Saeed, was gunned down in Karachi. On the 12th of September, LET terrorist Zia-ur-Rahman was killed while he was out for a stroll. And on the 6th of May, Paramjit Singh Panjwar, one of India's most wanted criminals and the head of Khalistan Commando Force, was gunned down in Lahore. So you have Khalistanis, you have Islamic extremists, they are all biting the dust in Pakistan, getting killed in their own playing field. What explains this? Are Pakistani terrorists now at war with themselves? Are these killings the result of some inter-gang rivalries? Whatever be the case, one thing is clear. These killings are not happening out of the blue. There certainly has been a trigger that has resulted in these cases. On to the other war now, which seems to have turned into a lost cause for the West. I'm talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. That Europe is getting war-weary is common knowledge at this point, but now Europe is coming to grips with the reality. It may not be in the position to help Ukraine anymore. But we are not the ones saying this. The bad news has been shared by EU's top diplomat, its foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell. On Tuesday, Josep Borrell said that the militaries of the EU member states have already supplied Ukraine with all the ammunition they could find in the existing stockpiles. He said that the European Union now has to rely on what can be domestically produced, meaning the Ukraine war has depleted Europe's arsenal. While until a few months ago, Ukraine's allies in Europe were scraping at the bottom of the barrel to arm Ukraine in its fight against Russia, now Europe just does not have any more weapons to give out. The top diplomat made the remarks ahead of the Foreign Affairs Council meeting when pressed on the EU's pledge to supply 1 million artillery shells to Kiev by March 2024. He said, and I'm quoting, I do not have ammunition here in Brussels. I do not have a stock of ammunition. I have to mobilize the stocks of the European armies. The first track, providing what the armies already had in their stockpiles, is already finished. Now, from the stockpiles of the armies, it is difficult to get more. There you have it. According to Borrell, EU had provided Ukraine with over 300,000 artillery shells already. Earlier, it was reported that the EU has only provided 30% of the artillery shells it promised Ukraine. The top EU diplomat saying that the flow of ammunition to Ukraine now depends on the manufacturing capacities of European weapons makers. Forget about more weapons. Europe is struggling to produce and send Ukraine the weapons it has already promised the war-battered country. Then yesterday, a big admission. On Tuesday, the members of the European Union admitted that they may be on the way to failing Ukraine on their promise. This happened after a meeting of EU's defense and foreign affairs ministers in Brussels. The EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, also cast doubt on the goal. Estonia's defense minister, Hanno Pevkur, stressed on the urgent need to ramp up the supply of weapons. He acknowledged how Russia has boosted the arms production. But on the battlefield, ammunition is the only thing that counts. And artillery rounds play a bigger role. Ukrainian forces use around 6,000 to 7,000 shells daily on the battlefield. But what has happened to the military equipment and the weapons that the West has provided Ukraine so far is the question. You see, the reality on the ground is much of what NATO provided Ukraine has been blown to smithereens by the Russian troops. Ukraine's much-hyped summer counter-offensive flopped, and Russian troops have recently also made confirmed gains in Donetsk region. The situation on the front lines is emblematic of the recent admission by Ukraine's commander-in-chief. The war has reached a stalemate, and now with weapons running out in the West and a war in West Asia taking all the attention away from Ukraine, Kiev seems to have become a lost cause for the West. Meanwhile, there is no end to Rishi Sunak's woes. The British Prime Minister is facing trouble on just about every front, from the Supreme Court declaring his scheme unlawful to a recently dismissed minister penning a scathing departure letter, and now even members within his own party vociferously calling for his resignation. The heat on the British Prime Minister is palpable. And amid this political turmoil, it is the ordinary citizens who are bearing the brunt. The cost of living crisis in the UK is so bad that people are unplugging their fridges in order to save money. Let's first get to the latest. On Wednesday, the British Supreme Court ruled the government scheme to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as unlawful. This deals a crushing blow to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Under the plan, remember, Britain had intended to send thousands of asylum seekers who came to the country without permission to the East African country. The goal was to deter the migrants from crossing the English Channel in boats. But the top court has unanimously rejected the government's appeal against an earlier ruling that migrants could not be sent to Rwanda because it could not be considered a safe third country. The judges agreed that the asylum seekers, if sent to Rwanda, would be at real risk of refoulement or ill treatment. It's no surprise then that after the ruling, Rwanda took objection. A government spokesperson said it took issue with the British court's conclusion that Rwanda was not a safe third country. The thing is, this is a big blow to Rishi Sunak because the Rwanda scheme was the central plank of his immigration policy. It was pushed amid concerns within his team that some of his voters are about the numbers of asylum seekers arriving in boats. According to opinion polls, Sunak's party, the Conservatives, are trailing by about 20 points. And the party had made a promise to stop the boats, one of the 5 key pledges of his premiership. In fact, according to news agency Reuters, this year, over 27,000 people arrived in the country without permission. Sunak has said that his government has been planning for all eventualities and would do whatever it took to stop illegal migration. The Supreme Court ruling has taken on even greater political significance after Sunak sacked the Interior Minister, Suella Braverman, a popular figure in his cabinet whose scope included dealing with immigration. And yesterday, Braverman exited her office with a massive parting shot. In a scathing letter posted on social media, she accused Rishi Sunak of being weak. Not just that, she said he had broken promises on tackling immigration and betrayed the British people. And if that was not enough, Sunak also faced his first no-confidence letter after the sacking of Braverman. Tory MP Andrea Jenkins, a loyalist of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, called for Sunak's replacement with a real Conservative Party leader, quote-unquote. Sharing her no-confidence letter on social media platform X, formerly Twitter, Jenkins said, and I'm quoting now, "Enough is enough. It is time for Rishi Sunak to go." And amid these challenges, it is the ordinary citizens who are bearing the burden of an escalating cost of living crisis. Reports showing that millions of families in the UK are resorting to desperate measures in a bid to safeguard their finances. And among these measures, by the way, some are even resorting to turning off their refrigerators. A recent study conducted by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation charity revealed alarming statistics. It says that a quarter of low-income households in the UK had accumulated debts to meet their basic food needs. That is approximately 2.8 million people. Further, a third of these households had to resort to selling their possessions so that they can generate the much-needed cash. The study found that 4 out of 5 households reliant on universal credit were going without food. The poor in the UK are compromising on meals, on heating, and even on new clothes. They are wearing the same clothes again and again. Shockingly, over 7 million households went without food and other essentials within a mere 6-month span. This despite the government's targeted support for the cost of living. San Francisco is hosting the APEC summit. Leaders from around the world are arriving, and all eyes are on one high-stake meeting, the one which is happening after a year, the meeting between US President Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has arrived in San Francisco. This is his first visit to the United States in 6 years. Overseas Chinese in the city gathered to welcome Xi Jinping. They lined up along the way from the airport to the hotel where Xi Jinping would be staying and waved Chinese flags. Xi Jinping is due to meet US President Joe Biden. Where exactly? The location has not been officially disclosed, but what we do know is it will be in the San Francisco Bay Area and it will be away from the main summit venue. Reports, however, saying that it will be at the historic and secluded country house of Filoli. When President Joe Biden was asked about his agenda for that meeting, this is what he had to say. Listen in.
To get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up the phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis, being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another. We can't take, as I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China, but what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
You see, after a long spell of strained ties, the US is trying to make amends with China. And high on Joe Biden's priority list is restoring military-to-military communication with China. As for Xi Jinping, he is seeking to entice foreign investment. He is also expected to dine with top US business executives. You see, China is facing an economic slowdown, and America's restrictions on investments in China have not helped the cause. There are disagreements between the two superpowers in terms of security, in terms of human rights. Last year, the value of U.S. foreign direct investment in China dropped to roughly $8 billion. This was the lowest level in nearly 2 decades. China had responded to the curbs with its own rules. It introduced limits on exports of critical minerals used to make computer chips. Simply put, a lot needs to be straightened out. While one meeting may not be able to solve everything, it is one step towards normalizing ties and opening communication. And Washington also hopes for more cooperation from Beijing in dealing with drug trafficking. The synthetic opioid drug fentanyl has become a menace in America, especially San Francisco. And the U.S. seeks China's help to rein in its production. Other than that, there are wars to discuss, of course. While U.S.-China ties seem to be toying with multiple high-level meetings and the leaders finally talking in person, there are several sticking points between the two. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed ministers of the APEC. He stressed that the U.S. believes in a region where economies are free to choose their own path and where goods, ideas, people flow lawfully and freely. Although Blinken stopped short of naming China, his words echoed the U.S. rhetoric in recent years that China bullies smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific. The White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, meanwhile, said, and I'm quoting, "President Biden is not going to be afraid to confront where confrontation is needed on certain issues where we don't see eye to eye." So what turn will this meeting take? Will the ties mend or will they fray further? Will the bromance brew between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden? For more on this, we are now being joined by Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone, who is in San Francisco, getting us the very latest and monitoring all those developments. Jessica, hi. What are you picking up regarding the expectations from the Xi-Biden meeting?
President Biden coming into this meeting with Xi Jinping on the outskirts of San Francisco with a few goals, but above all, he really just wants to set a floor under the relationship, make sure it doesn't worsen, increase communication, and yet Washington has set expectations low for major outcomes coming out of this summit. That said, they are looking to achieve some domestic outcomes. Number one, this U.S. president, he's running for re-election, and there is a fentanyl crisis across the country. We have thousands of Americans dying of the drug overdose from fentanyl, a highly addictive substance that has precursors that come from China across the southern border. So he's going to look to reestablish previous agreements that China has made, hold them to account for those, and make sure that they are working hand in hand with U.S. drug enforcement and law enforcement officials on that issue. Number two, the U.S. really wants to increase military-to-military communication, reestablish it in effect, because they say during this Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year in February, they could not get a hold of Beijing to find out what was going on. And with the increase and uptick in activity in the South China Sea, around the Taiwan Straits, and other key parts that also include shipping lanes, which are important to the entire globe, the U.S. really wanting to have an opportunity to reestablish those military-to-military communications with Beijing in order to deconflict and prevent any escalation of a military nature.
Right. Jessica, to what extent will the two wars, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas war, figure in the discussions given China's expanding outreach in West Asia?
We saw this in New Delhi during the G20, even though that was an economic conference much like this one. The Ukraine war was front and center for many, in particular in the West. So this will be no different. President Biden is expected to bring up a range of issues, the entire slate of issues, because this is the first time he's met face-to-face with President Xi in almost a year. So during their 4-hour meeting, we do expect the Russia-Ukraine war to come up. We also expect the President of the United States to try to get China to put some pressure on Russia vis-a-vis North Korea and their cooperation around the deployment of the missile program and the nuclear weapons program in North Korea. In terms of West Asia, there could be a key role for China to play. Obviously, China has increased its involvement in the region economically and also more recently diplomatically. The U.S. is looking to Beijing to put some pressure on Tehran with respect to its funding of Hamas and Hezbollah. If Hezbollah were to open up another front in that war, it certainly escalates what has already become a very bloody and controversial war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip that's taking thousands of civilian lives every day. So the U.S. looking to Beijing to put some pressure on Tehran vis-a-vis Hezbollah and also vis-a-vis Hamas itself, which of course is backed by the Iranian government from a funding perspective. So these two hotspots could have real U.S.-China cooperation coming into play, and we expect President Biden to raise those as well.
Right, Jessica, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those inputs. Shifting focus for now, an elderly Thai immigrant dies after being shoved to the ground. A Filipino American slashed in the face with a box cutter. A Chinese woman slapped and then set on fire. 8 people killed in a shooting rampage across 3 Asian spas in one night. As horrific as all of these incidents sound, there's also one thing that's common in all of them. Anti-Asian racism is not new in the United States, but the COVID-19 pandemic just made it worse. Our next report telling you about a new poll that focuses on America's racism epidemic. Take a look.
On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And soon after, terms like self-isolation, quarantine and lockdown became a part of our lives. But COVID-19 was also fueling the spread of another disease, and that is racism.
Talk to those 17 people.
Despite ongoing advocacy and legislation to combat anti-Asian racism that emerged after the pandemic, a new poll from AAPI Data and the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research finds that about a third of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have experienced an act of abuse based on their race or ethnicity in 2022, including being at the receiving end of verbal harassment, slurs, physical threats, or cyberbullying. The poll also finds that at least 14% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders believe they have been the victim of a hate crime almost every day, while around half, that is nearly 51%, believe racism is an extremely or very serious problem in America. Throughout American history, the topic of race has been a contentious issue. About 2 in 10 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders say they have experienced being verbally harassed or abused, and at least 22% have been called a racial or ethnic slur. About 1 in 10 also say they have been physically assaulted or threatened, and about a third of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders say they often or sometimes face discrimination because of their race or ethnicity when applying for jobs. It's been nearly 4 years since the pandemic altered our lives. And since then, shocking racist attacks against Asian Americans have occurred frequently in the United States. For instance, in July 2020, in New York City, an 89-year-old Chinese American woman was slapped in the face by 2 male strangers on the street. And when she tried to escape, the men set her clothes on fire from behind. America's historic division over race remains at the heart of so many conflicts we see today. The path forward, fraught with racial, political and social tension, should address the rising public health threat of violence towards Asian Americans. Public opinion data clearly shows that this problem is too great to ignore. More must be done to stop racism and hate. Evaluate emerging strategies and identify the best practices. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Tonight on the show, we talk about the good, the bad, and the bizarre that's happening in the professional world. You might be working hard to climb up the ladder and get that appraisal. But what if I tell you an American woman quit her hotshot corporate job and now she makes a fortune just by talking to animals? I'm not narrating the plot of Dr. Dolittle or a similar movie. This is what has happened in real life. Meet Nikki Vasconez. Until 3 years ago, she was working as a lawyer. Her work days were long and stressful. She was unhappy with what she was doing, but she was just too afraid to make a change. And that is when she stumbled upon her hidden talent, and her life completely changed. Nikki discovered that she could communicate with animals, apparently. In the year 2021, she began her own business. She made social media accounts talking about her capabilities, and soon Nikki started getting popular. People started following her social media handles. As of now, she has some 312,000 followers on TikTok and 87,000 on Instagram. And it wasn't long before requests started pouring in. People wanted to hire Nikki to communicate with their pets, whether they are dead or alive. Nikki says just 4 months after starting her accounts, she had to stop taking bookings. Her waiting list ran in thousands. At one point, about 4,000 people requested her to speak to their pets. Here's what her job entails. The animal communicator studies a photo of an animal. She asks it questions. Nikki says she is often able to telepathically hear the animal's responses. On other occasions, she says she can see imagery or experience emotions connecting her to the animals. Nikki claims that at one instance, she even physically felt the pain of a cat. The cat was really sick. Apparently, neither the pet owner nor the vet could figure out what was going on, what was wrong with the cat. But when Nikki tried to connect with the cat, she claims she felt a pain in her jaw. And that way she figured out that the cat had a tooth infection. And do you know how much Nikki earns doing all of this? A fortune. Nikki charges $350 for a 1-hour session. To do justice to her job, she conducts only 2 meetings a day, and this way Nikki earns $700 daily. Are you having second thoughts about your own job now? Well, just be happy that you don't work with British Railways, because lately the pranks there have gone out of hand. A train driver pulled 2 over-the-top pranks on his colleague. His name is John Richardson. What did he do? It might give you the creeps, quite literally. He put shed skeleton of a spider and snake skin in his colleague's compartment. Why would he do that? Because his colleague had told him that she disliked insects and spiders. Richardson says that he wanted to get a shock reaction out of his co-worker. He thought his colleague would be momentarily shocked, but would be relieved that it was just shed skin and not a live spider or snake. He thought his pranks are harmless. What do you think? Were they really harmless? Judging by how his colleague reacted, they were far from it. She was distressed by the incident. She asked another co-worker to remove the spider for her. When she saw Richardson later, she had abusive words to offer, which, of course, I cannot say on air. She also told Richardson that she does not want to receive such creepy things. But Richardson did not pay heed. A month after the spider, he placed a shed snake skin. His colleague says she felt intimidated, bullied, and harassed. She raised a formal complaint, and Richardson was fired for gross misconduct. There were panel hearings and proceedings. Richardson maintained that he was just pranking his colleague, that he could not understand her feelings or her request to stop. The tribunal has now decided that Richardson was unfairly and wrongfully fired. It says that while the shed spider skeleton and snake skin were distressing, they were ultimately harmless and easily disposed of. What do you think about all of this? Is it okay to pull pranks like this at the workplace? What even happened to professionalism? Where does one draw the line is the question. If a colleague tells you what they're afraid of, is it okay to use that against them? just as a joke. If the word abracadabra brings back childhood memories of a magician with a deck of cards at a birthday party, you are, of course, not alone. Magic, after all, is often the first form of entertainment that many of us experience. Starting with the peekaboo disappearing act, our minds are naturally drawn to illusions that defy what we know to be true. And as our brains grow and evolve, so do the tricks that entertain us. Take, for instance, in the most common trick ever performed, we have seen how a magician picks up a coin, conceals it in his hand, and after a magical gesture, it mysteriously disappears, only to reappear from behind your ear. As captivating as it sounds, experts say this universal appeal can be traced back to a deep-rooted psychological drive to explore things that we do not quite understand. And while most people simply think of magic as just another form of entertainment, the art deals with some of the most fundamental psychological and philosophical questions. For example, what do you believe to be possible? What is consciousness? How much control do you really have over your thoughts and your actions? And yet, until recently, the art of magic has received little scientific attention. And according to a recent study of magicians around the world, it is now discovered that illusionists may be less prone to mental health difficulties than other creatives and the general population. You heard that right. The research measured traits of almost 200 magicians and compared the results with data from other artistic groups and the general population. It found that magicians are significantly less likely to suffer from mental disorders than artists, musicians, and comedians. It also found that magicians were less likely to have unusual experiences like hallucinations or cognitive disorganization, which can make it hard to concentrate. For most magicians, this link between magic and psychology is obvious. Magic relies on powerful psychological illusions, and magicians create their tricks by exploiting gaps and errors in our conscious experience. Hence, the study suggests that mental health profiles for magicians are akin to those of mathematicians and scientists. And even though magicians are not concerned with understanding the anatomy of the brain, their experience in tricking people has helped them identify profound errors in cognition, which is rightly so, because most magic tricks rely on exploiting surprising and powerful cognitive errors, and magicians have informally learned to understand psychological principles that push our cognitive processes to breaking point. Science, you see, is not confined to laboratories. It exists all around us. And magic tricks are no exception, it seems. So the next time you watch a magic trick and see the magician perform his magic, remember there's more to the illusion than what meets the eye. Behind the magic lies a world of science waiting to be explored. On to the world of sport now. Virat Kohli has rewritten the record books at the ICC ODI World Cup. The 35-year-old has become the first cricketer in history to score 50 one-day centuries. Kohli broke the long-standing record of his idol and legendary cricketer Sachin Tendulkar against New Zealand in Mumbai. Tendulkar was present at the Wankhede Stadium along with English football icon David Beckham to see Kohli achieve that feat. Kohli had previously never scored a 50 in a World Cup knockout match, but has been in great form in this tournament. The 35-year-old walked in after the dismissal of skipper Rohit Sharma, who gave India a flying start. Kohli looked in sublime touch and completed his 100 of 106 balls. He punched the air and bowed down to Tendulkar. The entire crowd was on their feet, applauding the modern-day great for his historic achievement. In the crowd was also Kohli's wife, Bollywood actor Anushka Sharma. Kohli took 291 matches to score 50 ODI tons, while Tendulkar had taken more than 400 matches to score 49 centuries. The legend heaped praise on Kohli and posted on social media platform X. He said, "The first time I met you in the Indian dressing room, you were pranked by other teammates into touching my feet. I could not stop laughing that day, but soon you touched my heart with your passion and skill. I'm so happy that young boy has grown into a Virat player. Let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
Same-sex parents held protests in front of the Padua Tribunal in northern Italy to mark the opening of a trial to appeal the Italian government's order to cancel the non-biological parent from the birth certificate released by the local municipality. Gay rights activists denounced moves by the Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni's far-right-led government to limit recognition of parental rights to the biological parent only in families with same-sex parents. The European Commission announced a probe into online retail giant Amazon to see how its consumers' protection measures stack up against a new EU internet regulation law. The request for information focuses on Amazon's risk assessment and mitigation measures required under the EU's Digital Services Act, in particular with regards to the dissemination of illegal products and the protection of fundamental rights, said a Commission statement. Passenger bus slid off a Himalayan highway, killing at least 37 people and injuring 18 others in Kashmir. The 42-seater bus was on the way to southern Jammu city from Kishtwar town when it veered off the road and fell down about 660 feet on an older road in the mountainous region. The exact cause of the crash was not immediately known, but local police officers said the bus was overcrowded and speeding. A formal probe into the matter has been ordered. India has sought advice from the Thai company that rescued children from a flooded cave in 2018 as it races to save 40 men trapped in a road tunnel, officials said on Wednesday. Excavators have been removing debris since Sunday morning from the site in the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand to create an escape tunnel for the workers, all of whom are still alive. Greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere hit new record highs in 2022 with no end in sight to the rising trend, the United Nations warned on Wednesday. The United Nations World Meteorological Organization has said levels of the three main greenhouse gases, the climate-warming carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, all broke records last year.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
WION, India's global voice.
Israel woke up to a barrage of thousands of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hostilities have broken out between Israel and Palestine, and the tensions that had been gathering steam over the course of the last 7